Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are viewing this webinar from. My name is Rhoda Garland. I'm the Commissioner for the Rights of Persons with Disability in Malta. And I am very pleased to be invited to come and speak to you this afternoon about some of the issues that affect disabled people, specifically relating to education, and some of the strategies and the way that we tackle things in Malta, which Dr. Munir has asked me to share with you. So I'll give you a little bit of information first about the setup in Malta. We have a disability sector which is set in 3 areas. We have the ministry, who have the Directorate for Disability Issues, and they are required to run the disability strategy. They create it, having spoken with a lot of disabled people, and they are responsible for implementing the National Disability Strategy in Malta. The Commission, where I am the Commissioner, is the regulator for the disability sector in Malta. And what we are required to do is make sure that all of the services and all of the policies are being implemented in the right way. We also look at issues like policy. We give feedback to the EU and to government on areas that are related to disability sector. And we work hand in hand with the ministry in order to be able to make sure that we monitor the way that the strategy is provided. And that means that we are independent from the government. And that's very important because we have to be able to criticise when we need to and give recommendations if we think that there are different ways of going about things that the government need to take into consideration. And the third area is the support services. So this is an agency that looks after all of the support services that disabled people require, and that could be anything from the provision of a 24/7 live-in carer to assistance with community hours. Maybe somebody just wants some help at the weekend to go and buy food from a supermarket. It could be socialization, assistance. We run all sorts of different services that are for disabled people, and we have a service provider who are responsible for those. So if I think about the way that the disability sector has actually developed in Malta, I think there have been some big improvements in the last 10 to 15 years. Malta has actually passed the United Nations Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability into its national legislation. And what that means is that the rights of disabled people are actually protected with the same strength as other national legislation, rather than just ratifying the convention, which means that we have the intention to do it. There are actually obligations for the government to make sure that the articles of the United Nations Convention are actually adhered to, and that if we're not able currently to adhere to them, that we have policies in place that will enable us to work towards them. I don't know whether you know about Malta. Malta is a very small island just south of Italy, north of Libya, in the Mediterranean Sea. We are only 475,000 people. The register that the Commission has 27,000 people registered on it who have confirmed that they are disabled and receive benefits as a result of registering with us. And it's our job to look at what's going on in Malta, to hear the complaints from disabled people and be able to work on those complaints. So if we hear that there is a complaint from a parent who has a child in a school who is complaining about the learning support assistant or maybe that the lift in the school has broken, they can come to us if they are not getting a satisfactory response from the school, and we will take up their case and we will make sure that we find a resolution. So we are responsible for making sure that discrimination is fought against in every area of life within Malta. So I spend a lot of my time listening to parents who are concerned about things that are going on, and trying to make sure that the politicians and the policymakers and the people who are responsible for the problems are aware of them and put things in place. I would say in Malta we still have a lot of issues that we have to look at. It's quite a historic island. We have a lot of very, very old buildings and very old sites. So physical access can be difficult if people are wheelchair users. There is still a fair degree of stigma. So socially, whilst disabled people do go out more than they did when I arrived in Malta 18 years ago, there is still a feeling that sometimes things are not quite as good as they should be, and that people are stared at, and that people are not necessarily accepted. I think there's an understanding that physical disability needs to be dealt with. Generally in the population, they understand about providing ramps and providing lifts, but there is still a way to go with making sure that we have the right signage in place so that people with intellectual disabilities are able to get about. We need to be able to make sure that we have hearing loops installed for people who are deaf. We need to be able to provide more things in easy-to-read information so that people with intellectual disabilities are able to understand information to the same degree as their non-disabled peers. We have a 2% quota for employment, which is important. We have had we've been trying to have inclusive education in Malta since 1985-ish. And whilst that is in place, there has been some improvement in the ability for disabled people to be able to get work once they come out of school, which is obviously very important if you're going to talk about people being independent. So, and being able to live independently. So education and employment are areas that we concentrate on very much in order to make sure that disabled people have the sorts of opportunities that their non-disabled peers have. So that's basically a very brief outline of the social situation in Malta at the moment. I think that the overall things are improving. Since we implemented the UN CRPD into our national legislation, we have seen an increase in the number of complaints, which is a good thing because it means that disabled people understand their rights and they are feeling good enough to be able to complain about them. And we will cover every area of life that's covered under the articles of the UN CRPD. Within education, we have had mainstream education for children with disabilities for almost 30 years now, and I think that it's had a mixed reception, let's say. I think that for children who have disabilities that are not so severe, for children who have physical impairments, maybe people with visual impairments and hearing impairments, they are able to take part in mainstream education very easily. Some of them might need to have a learning support educator who works with them, but on the whole, children who have reasonably minor impairments are able to take part in mainstream education, either independently, completely, or with the assistance of a learning support educator. We also have what we call resource centres, and these are for children who have profound and complex learning issues, children who will probably never be able to take part in mainstream work after their education. And in these places they learn, they go, and they have the opportunity to learn daily living skills and communication skills. They have programs that are arranged for them that are more along the lines of therapeutic sessions. And that's very important because for the parents, they need to know that their children are not being ignored, that their children are still being given the opportunity to develop their skills and to be able to make the most of their, to reach their full potential. Because however complex a disabled child's impairments may seem to a non-disabled person, there is always the ability to learn and to be able to improve the situation. I think that's really important because in a lot of ways these children are written off. We decide that they are never going to be able to do anything that's going to be economically useful to the country, so why do we bother? And I think that this is a really important area to think about, because all children need to be educated, and the degree to which they can be educated obviously will vary depending on their own levels of functionality and their own abilities, but it's very important that they are still given these opportunities. The way that we set up these resource centres and for all children with disabilities is that we have individualised education programmes called an IEP, and in that is a meeting which is held every year with the head of the school, with the teacher, with the parents, sometimes with the disabled person themselves, the disabled child, and any therapists. So if they have occupational therapy or physiotherapy while they're at the school, then those therapists would also be included. If they have speech and language assistants in the school, those professionals would also be included. And the idea is that the child's progress is discussed. The parents look at how the child is developing at home, as well as what the teachers say and the educators say is happening within the school. And as a result, they come up with a plan for the education for that child for the next year. And it will have goals and it will have targets. And it will mean that the child has the opportunity to work towards goals and have some aims in their educational attainment for the next year. It's very important that these meetings include the professionals that work with these children. And it's also important that the parents are also included. This is something that is very misunderstood quite often. I think that teachers are wary that parents will be too demanding, or will be angry that their children are not progressing, or will not understand the limitations that their children might have, that the educators believe they have, and also vice versa. I have complaints from parents who say, I don't understand why my child's IEP says that they need to learn how to go up a flight of stairs on their own, when at home they go up the stairs on their own, they just don't do it at school. So in order to be able to get over these issues, it's important that the parents are also included. And it also means that the parents are aware of the goals that the children are working towards within school, and that they are able to then work on those skills at home as well. So there is a real proactive approach from all of the people who work with these students in order to be able to make sure that they have the right goals and that those goals are followed both at home and also at school. We do have complaints from parents about their children. I think sometimes it can be very difficult for parents to understand that the different types of impairment that their children have means that they are not necessarily going to be able to go to the school that the parent would like them to. In Malta, we are working on something which is more of a life cycle approach. So what we are working on is to create a database, a national database of disabled people. And we will be able to use that to plan for the future. So if we know that there were, 50 disabled children with various different impairments that were born in the year 2020, then we know that in the year 2025, some of them will need a learning support educator, and we can plan for that. And we know that in 16 years' time, some of them will need to be able to get a car and start to be able to drive, and they may need hand controls, or they may need a job coach in order to be able to help them in finding work. And so we have this life cycle approach, which is very important, especially for the educational years, because unless you start with the children and you are able to intervene very early on, then a lot of these children, if they are not given the attention and the support services that they need right at the start, then they fall behind, and it can be quite difficult for them to catch up afterwards. And obviously that's not a situation that we want any of them to be able to a situation that we want them to be in. We are aiming to have a board which will look at children in the penultimate year of their education. So children who are right at the end, in the year before their final year at school. We will assess them at that point and see how they are doing, what they are able to do. And then we have a number of alternatives that these children can go into. For some of them, they may need to go into a resource centre where they learn more daily living skills. For some of them, they may be able to go to our College for Arts and Science and Technology and do O-levels or A-levels, post-secondary education. For some of them, they'll be able to go straight into university and start a degree, and that's always a really good thing. But for those who have had more complex needs, and it's those students we need to concentrate on because they are always the ones who are left behind. What we want to do here is have a number of different situations that these children can go into after they leave mainstream education. And it could be that they go to a place where they have a therapeutic program where they are learning daily living skills. It could be that they go somewhere where they have a mixture of therapeutic programs, but also some educational programs. We have schools where they learn home economics, they do craft, they are able to have an IT lab, and they obviously have more support in order to use these labs, but they are able to attain some level of additional education. So we have these resource centres where they can go. And we have our aim is to have a whole range of these different places where, depending on the way that the children have progressed in education, this will depend on where they end up. One of the problems we have is that all of the parents want their children to go to the the College for Arts and Science and Technology, because that's where the non-disabled students go. And what they want is for them to be with their non-disabled peers. That's not always a good thing, because it can be that these students don't cope in that setting, that they don't manage to be able to be educated at the level that the rest of the students are. And that can cause complications, because especially if children have, for example, challenging behaviour, they may be disruptive to children who are capable of learning something in that setting. And that's one of the issues that we find quite often, that children end up in an educational institute where they are not really able to cope. And what we then have to do is find somewhere, and they do that, they end up there because that's where the parents really want them to go. And what we need to do is we need to be able to educate the children so that they are able to go into the appropriate level. And I don't want to ever tell a disabled child, no, you're never going to get to the college. What I want to be able to tell the parents is that there needs to be maybe a pathway. So maybe they go to one institution for a year and they learn some things, and then they go into another institution where they learn something at a slightly higher level. And it may be eventually that they will be able to get into the college that their parents always wanted them to go to. And sometimes it will mean that they can't. And I think we have to be pragmatic about this. It's very important that children are not stressed by being put into situations where they simply can't possibly cope because of their specific impairments. We have issues with children who have autism and challenging behaviour, who are frustrated because they're in the wrong setting. And so it's very important that we take a holistic and child-centred approach to these children, and that as we go through their education, we make sure all of the time that we are looking at the specific needs of these children, and that they are the ones who we concentrate on and exactly what they want to be able to do. It's important that we cover the areas that these children need, but what we also need to be able to do is make sure that they're in the right place. And that's not just for the sake of those disabled children not being frustrated, but that's also to protect the educational rights of other disabled children and non-disabled children who they might be being educated with. I think in Malta, at least, we have managed to deal with the education of children who have physical and sensorial impairments quite well. I even think that the provision of programs for people with intellectual disabilities are also very well covered. There is an understanding that the programs that people with intellectual impairments can take part in can actually be quite complex. At the Commission, we have 40 employees, and over half of them are disabled people. I myself am disabled. I have spina bifida. I walk with crutches. I have people at the Commission who have all sorts of different impairments. I have people with spinal injuries. I have people who are deaf, people who have various different levels of visual impairment, and I have people who have psychosocial, mental health, and intellectual impairments. And all of the people at the Commission work on their own, doing jobs that they are suited to do. And that's very important, because if you give somebody a job and also a course that they are not able to do it leads to frustration and additional resources being spent in making sure that you can keep these children going at the same time. In the commission, I have a lady who has an intellectual disability who has worked with the researcher and been able to write a paper for the Disability and Society journal on overprotection of people with intellectual impairments. So it's really important that we understand that if you have an intellectual impairment or if you have a mental health impairment, it doesn't mean that you are not able to get along in life and to be educated. This employee went to a conference in Norway to present her paper in front of 2,000 people, and she did it in English, which is not her first language. So the potential of people with intellectual impairments is really, really high if you give them the right levels of support. And the same thing goes for people with psychosocial impairments. I had somebody at CRPD, that's the commission, who came for an interview to be an administrator working on registering people in our database. And she did a really good interview. She was a young woman in her late teens. She hadn't had a lot of jobs, but at that age, we weren't expecting her to have stayed anywhere for a long time because you want to look around and see what things are available for you, and you want to see where you want to settle down. So I didn't worry about the fact that she hadn't stayed in jobs for a very long time. And she stayed with us. She started working. She was fine. And then she had a problem where she had a complete meltdown, and it really shocked us. We weren't expecting her to be able to do this. We had no indication that she had an impairment at all, but she had a complete meltdown and was screaming and running down corridors. It was very upsetting for everybody, and we had to make sure that they were able. We realized that she had some sort of a mental health issue, and we had to adjust her job so that she would be able to do the work and stay working with us. She was worried that because we then found out that she had this impairment, we would get rid of her, which obviously wasn't the case at all. But we did have to change her job because it wasn't suitable. She had bipolar, and it wasn't suitable for her, the job that she was doing. So we amended it so that we could keep her employed with us. And so the ability to look at a person's achievements, what they're able to do, and to fit what they want to do with what they're capable of and provide the support in order to be able to make sure that they can achieve that is very important. And that happens in education just as much as it does in employment. These are very important areas that we need to really concentrate on, because I think that the potential for people with mental health conditions and also intellectual impairments means that they are often, there's a high degree of stigma. For people with mental health problems, there will be issues in that there may be so much stigma that they don't want to admit that they have the condition. And if they have a mental health condition and they don't tell the educator or the employer about it, then you can't provide assistance. It's very difficult. We couldn't provide assistance to our employee until we realized what she had, and we didn't realize what she had until she had a problem. I think that it's really important that people are able to monitor disabled people, not in an eerie way, but just to be aware of how and be flexible about the way that they are educated. Because if you believe that one type of education is going to work and you plan an IEP and the child doesn't appear to be coping with it, it's no good waiting until the next year and then deciding, oh, now we'll see what went wrong. I think it's important that we are able to be proactive and that we can change things as we go along. You have to see what happens to these children and you have to be able to adapt yourself. One of the things I think that's made that easier is the use of assistive technology. Certainly for people who have problems using their hands, who have visual issues, the use of assistive technology has been a revelation. The ability to be able to use screen readers for people who have visual impairments has meant that the provision of education has been made a lot easier. But it does require more effort from the educator. It's all very well if the child with the visual impairment has a screen reader and has learnt to use a screen reader. That's great, but it's no good if the teacher doesn't send the information for the lesson in advance in a format that will be readable by the screen reader. So it does put an onus on educators for the disabled children in their classes to be more aware of the provision of information in advance and the planning that's required in order to be able to go into that lesson. One of the things that would make that much easier would be universal design in education, which is something that's talked about a lot, but not really taught in very many places. I know a few places in Italy where it works, and what this entails is using different methods of teaching. So not necessarily just standing in front of a class with a whiteboard or a blackboard and a piece of chalk. It means mixing up the methods by which you are teaching so that all of the children in the class are able to understand the concepts through different means. And that could be through charts or through drawing. It could be through looking through magazines. The ability, again, the onus is unfortunately on the educator to be able to do this, and I fully understand that educators have very limited time, but maybe if we were to move towards universal education as a main means of educating, then this would really assist disabled children, and it would mean that you can put disabled children in mainstream schools and the ability to be educated with the rest of their non-disabled peers will be made easier. When I'm old, I'm 55. When I was in primary school, I was the only disabled child in the school, and I was obviously very short. I'm only just over 4 foot tall now, so I was quite tiny. But in the school, where at the end of the day, all of the children had to put their chairs on their desks so that the cleaning ladies could clean the classroom, somebody else had to put the chair on my desk. And the peers, my non-disabled friends at school, all rallied round. You know, I didn't need a lot of things doing for me, maybe lifting things off high shelves, but the inclusion of non-disabled peers in the classroom who can assist is good for everybody, because not only does it mean that the disabled person feels fully included, but it also teaches the disabled children and the non-disabled children, that they can work together. And it removes the idea of stigma from the minds of non-disabled children. They become used to having children with disabilities around, and that's really important if we're going to move towards full inclusion in society. I think I'm almost done. I think that education is really, really important, really important. And unfortunately, a lot of times it means a lot of extra work for the educators. But I think that having an inclusive scenario where children can be taught at their level in the way that suits them best with the right levels of support means that all children will have the ability to be able to reach their full potential. And for some of them, that will mean going on and getting PhDs. And for some of them, it will mean that they might be able to leave a therapeutic program at the age of 20, having learnt to tie their shoelaces and clean their teeth and maybe make a cup of tea. And this is just as important an achievement as the student who ends up with a PhD. And for the students and the parents, there is a sense of achievement and the ability to say, I got to where I needed to go. And I did that because I had the right levels of support. So I think the provision of support, the provision of the right policies in order to be able to make sure that children are educated, having the right planning in place is all really important. And I wish you every success in whatever you are doing while you are working with disabled children in your roles. I am quite happy now to take any questions if you would like to ask them. At the class level, what is the support? Every child has a special teacher to help who assists him. Do you reduce student numbers so that the disabled students? Okay, so in Malta, what we have is in the mainstream schools, we have a teacher in the class, and then we will have, depending on the needs of the student, some students will need a learning support educator to themselves, and in some situations they may be able to share a learning support educator with another student. So we don't reduce the numbers of children in the class. What we will do is we will have the teacher at the front of the class who is taking the class, and we will have a learning support educator sitting with the child, giving the support and assistance that they might need in order to be able to take part in the class. So we don't reduce, this is in mainstream schools, we don't reduce the class sizes. In the resource centres, where we have children who have profound and complex needs, we still don't have one-to-one learning support educators. What we will have is we will have a teacher, but we might only have 8 students and maybe 3 LSEs, learning support educators. So in the resource centres, we have much smaller classes, only 6 to 8 students. And we will have shared LSEs. And the idea here is that when they are very young and they are in therapeutic programs, they may need a one-to-one LSE. But what we are trying to do is to work towards being more independent. And so as they move into secondary school, where they get more education and less therapy, we reduce the LSE level, so they have shared LSEs and a teacher still at the front of the class. I hope that answers the question. Suggest how teachers can support learners with disabilities and how teachers can improve themselves. So I think that the way that the support staff especially in our resource centres work, is that they have a really close understanding of the issues that the child faces. It's very important that you understand the way that the child works, the way that the child responds to different methods of education. Um, and I think that's really important, because you have to have a child-centered approach when it comes to these children. So it won't be the same for every child. For some, it will mean that every time they have a maths problem, you have to sit down with colored crayons and you have to be able to show it in a drawing rather than with numbers. So I think that's important, that children are specifically looked at individually. And I think with regards to the teachers, there is a ton of information about universal education design out there. And I think that's probably the most, one of the most large areas in education that you can look at. As well as having an understanding of the children that they are teaching, it's also important that they have the ability to get training. I think that if you put a teacher in a classroom and they haven't been trained, and they have a lot of children who have different abilities and different impairments, it's a recipe for disaster. It's very important that teachers have the right levels of training in order to be able to teach children with disabilities, because the differences can be profound, and they can require a huge amount of diversification in the way that you approach the subject. Which right of people with disabilities is least respected? Okay. I think it's a cultural thing. I think that rather than looking at specific rights, you have to look at the ability to learn. You have to look at the ability to be accepted. Inclusion, when you say, we will put this in place so that disabled people can get into the building, it's like you're saying, okay, we'll give you this, but actually it's a right. And what's important is that inclusion, for me, is the most important thing. And that doesn't mean tolerance. What that means is that you have a full understanding of the support and the additional issues, and you are able to meet those needs. I don't want to feel like people are putting up with me. I want to feel like people accept me in exactly the same way as they accept anyone else. Obviously, in a small island like Malta, physical accessibility is a disaster in some places, and it causes big issues. But also, stigma related to challenging behaviour is also a huge issue here, because we are a very tight community. People are very everybody knows everybody because it's such a small population, huge extended families. So these stigmas, getting rid of stigma, I think, is the thing that I would try and address most. Sorry, there was a really long conversation. Okay, Angus Lee, that the poor economic situation is often cited as a reason for not respecting the rights of persons with disability. On the other hand, people with special needs are integrated into the regular education system. I'm a supporter of integration, but the teachers at the facilities are not trained to work with students with special needs. I think that's absolutely right. I think one of the issues that we have had in Malta, historically, I will just have to go back a bit. Historically, old people and disabled people were always part of the same ministry in Malta. They came under the same politician. And that was because there was a feeling that old people and disabled people needed the same sorts of services. We also have other minorities in Malta. We have a thriving LGBT community. We have women's rights groups. Um, we have a lot of different minorities going on in Malta. Um, and for most of those minorities, um, if you put a policy in place, it doesn't cost a lot. But if you put a policy in place for a disabled person, it usually has €1 million budget attached to it, because providing services for disabled people is always expensive. And it's one of the things that politicians get their heads around when it's coming around to elections, and then you have to poke them a bit to make sure they realize that they still have to keep putting the money in later on. So it's absolutely right that teachers need the support, they need the ability to be able to deal with the complex and expensive services that provide support for disabled people. And also that the training that they need has to cover all sorts of different areas. There's a question come up about particular programs in handling learners with mental disorders. It's been a big issue here in Malta, and it's a current issue that we have, because we had children who were in therapeutic programs who then went into education and really couldn't cope. And there is very specific training for children for teaching of children who have mental disorders. You have to understand about what things will trigger them. So if a child is having a meltdown, it's not usually because they just fancy having a meltdown. It's because something has upset them and has caused that behavior. And so for a teacher to be able to step back and analyze what has gone on and see what it was that triggered that child. Because if you can avoid what triggers the child, you will be able to teach that child in a much better way. So again, I'm looking at personal-centered approaches. I'm really understanding the students that you have. And obviously, if you have a whole group of people with mental health disorders, then you must have the appropriate levels of support, and they may well need to all have a learning support person with them who understands their specific needs. But there are lots of courses on challenging behaviour and mental health disorders, and they're essential, I think, because it's not fair to put an educator in a room with a whole bunch of people who have mental health impairments and expect them to be able to cope in the same way as they would a class full of non-disabled children who will, on the whole, be reasonably well behaved for an hour. So you have to be aware of the types of impairments that are in your class, and you have to be able to know how to deal with them and how to keep a control over the things that trigger people. You know, if you have children who are upset by certain colors, if you have children who are upset where if another child shouts too loud, these are all things that you have to be very, very aware of, and it makes it very difficult. And I think that's why it's important that you also have the right levels of support, that it's not enough for a teacher to be left in the classroom on their own with students who have mental health impairments. It's important that they are able to work alongside learning support educators who will also have detailed knowledge about what that specific child requires, and also have been trained in order to be able to work and support with these students. Thank you very much. Thank you.